ye, hear ye, hear ye. This court of Indiana is now in session. Please be seated.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to Michael Barnes's retirement ceremony. I know he very much appreciates it. I'd like to begin here today by introducing members of our Court of Appeals, besides, of course, the honoree, Judge Barnes here. I'd like to start out here with Judge John Baker, Judge Robert Altice, Judge Melissa May, Judge Terry Crone, Judge Edward Ted Najum, Judge Patricia Riley, Judge James Kirsch, Judge Mark Bailey, Judge Margaret Robb, Judge Paul Mathias, Judge Cale Bradford, Judge Elaine Brown, and there you are, Judge Marty Wentworth. And I'd also like to go through a list of all the dignitaries that are here. And please, if you'd hold your applause, because I think probably half of the room here, if not more, is filled with dignitaries. So here we go. Retired Justice Ted Boehm. Retired Justice Frank Sullivan. Retired Judge William Gerard. Retired Judge Linda Cheatham. Curtis T. Hill, Jr., Indiana Attorney General. Stephen Owens, Indiana State Public Defender. Sharon Jackson, Michael Nossett, and Cindy Carrasco, all from the Deputy Attorney General to Governor Eric Holcomb. Here's also with, this is part of the team, the Joe Herron's team, who he'll be speaking later. For trial court judges, the Honorable John Broden, the Honorable Andre Gamage, the Honorable Elizabeth Hurley, the Honorable David Chaplot, the Honorable Stephen Nation, the Honorable Stephen Hostetler, the Honorable Elizabeth F. Tavitas, Judge of the Lake Superior Court. The last two, Judge Hostetler and Judge Tavitas, are on the final panel for Judge Barnes' position. The Honorable Jane Magnus Stinson, for a Chief Judge from the United States District Court in the Southern District. Andrew Radovich, Magistrate from the Federal Court. Mike Gotch is here, Magistrate from the Federal Court. Other federal dignitaries, Jill Donnelly, the wife of our U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly. Haj Patel, State Director for U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly, is also here. Local offices, we have Kenneth Cotter, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor. From the Bar Associations, we have Carlton Martin, the President of the Marion County Bar Association, and James Bell, the President of the Indianapolis Bar Association, and the Honorable Robert Frazee, Bob, President of the Indiana Judges Association, who came here at the last minute. Thank you for coming. Other dignitaries, we have James Jim Young from the Judicial Nominating Commission, Bob Rath, the Director of Appellate Court Technology, Gregory Packmeyer, Clerk from the Indiana Supreme Court, James Owens from Stark County, Illinois, the state's attorney there. David Van Gilder, also a finalist for Judge Barnes' position. Karen Graves, Administrator for the Indiana Tax Court. Larry Morris, Administrator for the Court of Appeals. Robert Rucker, from the a senior judge from the Indiana Court of Appeals. Yeah, as well as Zeke Friedlander, senior judge from the Court of Appeals, and senior judge Thomas Fisher from the Indiana Tax Court. And I think that I got everyone. If I didn't, Carr Darden from the Indiana Court of Appeals. And if anyone else I missed, I'm sorry. So let me go ahead then and introduce our competent and capable Supreme Court Chief Justice, Justice Loretta Rush.
Thank you, Chief Judge Vedic. I'm very proud to introduce my colleagues on the Indiana Supreme Court, and I'll start with our newest Justice, Christopher Goff, who just told us today that he has never reversed any opinion of Judge Barnes, but Judge Barnes did reverse him. We also have Jeffrey Slaughter, Mark Massa, and Justice Stephen David. We have a brief gift for Judge Barnes from Justice David.
Madam Chief Judge, Madam Chief Justice, the Honorable Honoree, Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor. Take too long. Very briefly, on behalf of your Indiana Supreme Court, we have two things, Judge. We have our Supreme Court recognition certificate, and we have a number of frames from which you can choose that we'll worry about that later. Thank you. Most importantly, not just from the Indiana Supreme Court, but from all of Indiana's trial judiciary, the Indiana Supreme Court has its own challenge coin, which traces its origin back to ancient times. It was tradition on the battlefield that the warrior was given a gold coin by the commander. And this has been the tradition for centuries. It's converted over time to not real gold, but instead embossed with the emblem of the unit, or in our case, of the Supreme Court of the state of Indiana, indeed all of the judiciary of the state of Indiana. So on behalf of all trial judges, all appellate judges, and certainly your Supreme Court, we want you to have this challenge coin. It was given to warriors on the battlefield for a job well done, and we give this to you today for a job indeed very well done.
All right, let me go ahead and introduce Joseph Herons here. He's the Chief Counsel for Governor Eric Holcomb, and he's here to give a short presentation and speech as well.
Judge Barnes, Chief Judge Vedic, Chief Justice Rush, members of the Supreme Court Court of Appeals, and honored guests, good afternoon. Governor Holcomb wishes he could have been here today to present this award himself, but unfortunately that wasn't possible, so it's my privilege and frankly honor to present it on his behalf. Under Governor Holcomb, the Sagamore Award, as the state's highest award, is reserved only for those who have made truly remarkable contributions to our state or to their community, and who are deserving of special recognition. Judge Barnes has done that and so much more. When we talked in our office about Judge Barnes and what I would say today, one thing was obvious. Very few people in our state have made such a remarkable contribution to their community, to the legal field, to the judiciary, to the rule of law and the prosecution of crime, and to vulnerable populations and other worthy causes as Judge Barnes has during his long and distinguished career. We learned that Judge Barnes wasn't content to just be an effective prosecutor of a major county in our state at a young age in the 1970s. Looking at his career, it's clear he wanted to make much more of a significant impact to the state. Judge Barnes's remarkable career has involved not only serving as a prosecutor and appellate judge, but also helping to prevent domestic and family violence and sexual abuse of children, supporting disabled individuals, and contributing to so many other worthy causes. And he has been the recipient of numerous awards recognizing his many contributions. So it was no surprise on May 22nd of 2000 that Governor Frank O'Bannon selected him to serve on our state's second highest court, where he brought his vast experience, knowledge, and wisdom to bear for the benefit of our state and its people, and our judiciary is better because of it. In closing, I wanted to share that we also learned Judge Barnes is an avid baseball fan, with his team being the Cleveland Indians. So I wanted to mention several quotes that I think are relevant here. The first is from a major league coach who once said, "There are three types of baseball players: those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those who wonder what happens." Well, there's no doubt Judge Barnes is squarely in the first category. He has made it happen in so many positive ways over his long and distinguished career. The second quote is from a famous Cleveland Indians pitcher, Robert William Andrew Feller, whose pitches at times were so fast and so good that he was called the heater from Van Meter. Feller was a prodigy who bypassed the minor leagues and began his big league career at age 17. And he was not only an 8-time All-Star who was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962 on the first ballot, but he was later recognized by many as the greatest pitcher of his era. Baseball Hall of Famer Ted Williams once called Feller the fastest and best pitcher I ever saw during my career. And so I share the following quote about why he loved baseball. Feller said, "Every day is a new opportunity. You can build on yesterday's success or put its failures behind and start over again. That's the way life is, with a new game every day, and that's the way baseball is too." Judge Barnes, on behalf of Governor Holcomb, it's my honor to present this award to you on your retirement from the Indiana Court of Appeals. And like the heater from Van Meter, we note that every day, including the first day after your retirement, is a new opportunity. Congratulations.
Thank you, Joe. Let me now introduce to you a good friend for many, many years of Judge Barnes, Mitch Heppenheimer, who is a South Bend attorney and the immediate past president of the Indiana State Bar Association. Mitch, over to you.
Thank you. Fellow justices of the courts, state court judges here, honored guests, family, friends. I'm here on behalf of the St. Joseph County Bar Association, which didn't quite make the program, and the Indiana State Bar Association. When Judge Barnes and I started practicing law in the early 1970s and mid-70s, joining a bar association was expected. It was standard procedure. Certainly, most new lawyers in St. Joseph County would join the County Bar Association. Both Judge Barnes and I worked at law firms at that time and were very active in the county bar, and we both joined the bar when we came in. Mike's a few years older than me. Bar associations are where lawyers meet to socialize, to network, to perform community service, to get their continuing education requirements, and matters such as that. Bar associations also foster professionalism among its members. It promotes civility among lawyers. I believe it's much easier to practice law, to represent clients, and do what we do on a daily basis when I'm familiar with the lawyers that I work with. It is something that the Bar Association facilitates quite a bit. The Bar Association also encourages interaction between the bench and the bar. Again, professionalism and civility in the courtroom is in large part because of the interaction that judges and lawyers have in the Bar Association events. We are very fortunate that most state court local judges are involved in the various county and city bar associations throughout the state of Indiana. Members of the Indiana Supreme Court and the Indiana Court of Appeals are all very generous with their time and energy to the many activities of the Indiana State Bar Association and local bar associations. Lawyers in this state also benefit by the ability to meet and participate with all of our Indiana judges for the good of our legal profession. We thank all the judges for their participation and efforts with the bar associations in the state as well as local. I've known Judge Barnes through these bar association activities as well as socially. We've attended a baseball game or two together. We had one brief professional moment. That is the one case that Mike Barnes and I had against each other in the landmark 1991 United States Supreme Court case concerning First Amendment right to dance at adult entertainment establishments. Now, the case is known as Michael P. Barnes, St. Joseph County Prosecutor, versus Glenn Theaters et al. I represented one of the et als. I believe, if memory serves me right, that Judge Barnes was able to attend the oral argument before the Supreme Court since his name was on the case, and that occurred in January 1991. Unfortunately, my client ran out of money, and I was not able to attend that hearing. In the over 40 years that I've known Mike Barnes, I know him to be a model of what a judge should be, what a prosecutor should be, what a lawyer should be, what a baseball fan should be, what an American should be, what a dog lover should be, and what a family man should be. My knowing of Mike Barnes has made me a better person. It is my distinct honor and privilege to be here today to represent both the St. Joseph County and the Indiana State Bar Association to honor Mike. I have 3 gifts for Mike. And he didn't tell me about the steps, so why don't I give him to you?
All right.
One takes a little bit more than the other. First one is on behalf of the St. Joseph County Board of Commissioners through the St. Joseph County Bar Association. This is a key to St. Joseph County. We welcome you back and thank you for a job well done. I got to get a picture of this to send back to the commissioners. So, the second gift takes a little bit of a background. In June of 1964, there was a civil rights rally at Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois. One of the participants was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Many dignitaries refused to attend and participate at that rally and stand with Dr. King. It was 1964. Father Theodore Hesper from University of Notre Dame agreed to attend and participate. There is an iconic picture taken that day with Dr. King and Father Ted linked arm in arm while singing We Shall Overcome. That picture now hangs in the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. A statue of Dr. King and Father Ted, again linked arm in arm, was created and stands across the street from the St. Joseph County Courthouse. In June of last year, most of the federal and state judicial officers who either sit in St. Joseph County or are from St. Joseph County gathered for a picture of this statue. The purpose was to send the message of these judges' commitment to the principle and civil rights of equality. This is Judge Barnes' copy of this iconic photograph from the St. Joseph County Bar Association. And Mike is in here, scrolled away, he had to enlarge the picture. The last presentation is from the Indiana State Bar Association, and it is a print of the Indiana Court of Appeals courtroom. I know you spent a lot of time there over the last 18 years. You've done it well. You did it with honor and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. I think that second picture was a picture taken years later on an anniversary in front of the same place where Martin Luther King and the father shook hands. Is that right? And it was up at the St. Joseph County Bar Association. Is that right? That's
It's a
all right.
statue,
Not worth it.
Here, let's get the picture for the commissioners. Mitch
Yeah.
works with the commissioners, so he wants to get to it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Make sure that you brought it safely. Thank you.
Next, we have Attorney Glenn Johnson. He has been the senior clerk for Judge Barnes since Judge Barnes came 18 years ago. He is leaving. This is going to be a huge loss for our court as well. And he will be going to the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council as their research attorney there. So, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, justices, judges, honored guests. It's an honor to talk to you today on behalf of all of Judge Barnes' past and present clerks. We're a pretty small group, just 8 of us who are full-time, plus 3 who helped out short-term, and we consider each other a second family, along with Judge and his administrative assistant, Lynn Aldridge. We've been so close as a chambers that Judge Barnes likes to tell people that we, his clerks and Lynn, work with him, not for him. That tells you a little something about him right there. It hardly seems possible that almost exactly 18 years ago I set foot in Judge Barnes' chambers as his very first employee as a member of the Court of Appeals. One of the best pieces of advice my late father Steve ever gave me was to apply for clerkship of Judge Barnes when he was appointed to the court. I didn't know at the time that I would still be here now. The practice of judges hiring so-called career permanent clerks was not quite as widespread as it is now. I thought I might be leaving in a couple of years, but I have been extremely fortunate that Judge Barnes has never been a believer in making changes for the sake of making changes, and is probably the most loyal person you could imagine. Just ask the good people at Irea's restaurant here in town, where judges just like Norman Cheers, they all know his name, and his name there, by the way, is Mike, not Judge. Judge Barnes' loyalty is very much returned, and when I speak of loyalty, I don't mean a kind that is forced or coerced, but one that comes completely naturally. Otherwise, I'm not sure how he could have convinced Lynn, who also is retiring today, to uproot her life and follow him down from South Bend, Indianapolis, to be his assistant here, after working with him in the prosecutor's office for so many years. They've been together for about 35 years now. And by the way, I speak for all of us clerks in being very grateful that Lynn did follow him down here. With her combination of common sense, technical know-how, and professionalism, she's kept the office running smoothly. We never have to worry about what happens up front in the office because we always knew Lynn would handle it. For that, I'd like to give her a moment of thanks.
Stand up, Lynn. Stand up. Stand up, Lynn. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. There you go.
As with Lynn, Judge never forgets those who've made a difference in his life. That includes the 2 nuns who taught at the Catholic school Judge Barnes attended, who he continued to write and send gifts to until their recent passing, or the fellow members of his undefeated high school football team that he reunited with a few years ago, or Dick Good, the former director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, whom Judge Barnes visited weekly as Dick battled cancer, or Anna Holden, former intern turned law clerk whose wedding to her husband John he officiated. And of course, as mentioned, there's the Cleveland Indians, as well as Notre Dame football. But true to form, Judge Barnes has been more than just a fan of those teams. He often took Notre Dame players under his wing in South Bend and has been personally close to members of the Indians team and staff, such as their longtime trainer, Jimmy Warfield, for whom Judge Barnes delivered a powerful eulogy upon his passing. Those are just a few examples of Judge Barnes' character and loyalty. I should point out that although Judge Barnes changed law clerks as infrequently as possible, in part because of that loyalty, He wanted to give as many young law students as possible an opportunity to gain valuable experience on the Court of Appeals, and so he often had interns or externs working in our office. Judge Barnes has been a very stalwart supporter of the Indiana Supreme Court's CLEO program for law students and has had 15 different CLEO interns and has hosted numerous other interns and externs directly from our law schools. And anyone who's been in Judge Barnes' office will notice the numerous photographs and plaques of honor, including signed ones from presidents and governors and attorneys general. That is, if you can see those things when you go into his office, because it's always dark because he refuses to turn the lights on. There's also a brick from the famous Kitty Cat Lounge in there. But despite all these indicators of Judge Barnes' success and prestige, he would always seem to take the most pride in talking about things like his work as a blue-collar hod carrier when he was young, doing the physically demanding job of hauling materials around a construction site. His ability to empathize with, quote, everyday people has always been a key to his judging. And of course, his good humor is well known among the court and its staff. Everyone who was there at the time remembers the court holiday party, when a local improv comedy group was brought in to provide entertainment, and Judge Barnes ended up stealing the show with his impersonation of a, let's just say, a prominent political figure. He always has a steady supply of jokes, funny stories from his prosecutor days, and colorful metaphors to share. Maybe more than a few of us here have heard him say things like, even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while. Or if something didn't quite work out, he might say, that went over like a pregnant pole vaulter. And on a brutal winter day, he might say it's colder than a well digger's rear end. But you get the point there. And what you see is what you give Judge Barnes, truly authentic. If he likes something, he'll let you know. If he doesn't, he'll let you know that too. He's the same person outside chambers or on the bench hearing argument as he is in chambers. I couldn't have asked for a better place to work for nearly 2 decades. Even on those days when the song Starry, Starry Night by Don McLean was on repeat, blasting from the judge's office and him singing along. He also went through a Cher phase and a Dixie Chicks phase and a Rod Stewart phase. Of course, though, when it comes to the brass tacks of deciding cases and writing opinions, the fun and games are put aside. I can tell you that Judge Barnes has been dedicated to giving every litigant in every case his full and fair consideration. Whether the appeal concerns a small claims judgment or a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit, a misdemeanor conviction or a murder conviction, or whether a litigant is pro se or represented by the highest paid attorney in the state. I believe that consideration is reflected in his opinions. That is, I think even losing parties generally read his opinions and feel they're given a fair shake, that they and their arguments were treated with respect. I think this comes about in part because Judge Barnes always has had an open door policy, always inviting clerks and interns to come into his office and argue with him on occasion, challenge his notions about a case. He wouldn't always change those notions, but neither was he afraid of changing his mind if he felt the facts and the law required him to do so. And not only does Judge Barnes have a great instinct for the law, he has a steel-trap memory. He often will tell us clerks, take a look at such and such a case I prosecuted 30 years ago. I think it's relevant. Or, hey, isn't this case like that reckless homicide case or that case about jurisdiction we did 15 years ago? And almost inevitably, after we do a Westlaw search, we find he's spot on. One of Judge Barnes' legal heroes is Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who also served as U.S. Attorney General and Chief Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. Justice Jackson famously said, "A sensitiveness to fair play and sportsmanship is perhaps the best protection against the abuse of power, and the citizen's safety lies in the prosecutor who tempers zeal with human kindness, who seeks truth and not victims, who serves the law and not factional purposes, and who approaches his task with humility." This quote means a lot to Judge Barnes, I know. He specifically wanted it included in one of his opinions where he thought the prosecutor had overreached. This quote defined his approach to being a prosecutor, to be sure, but it also describes him as a judge. I believe I can speak for anyone who ever clerked or interned with Judge Barnes. His combination of zeal and kindness, his dedication to the letter of the law, tempered by innate fairness and humility, influenced all of us, much for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next, we have the Honorable Joe Hogsett, Mayor of the City of Indianapolis.
Madam Chief Justice, Madam Chief Judge, distinguished members of the court, honored guests, and may it please the court. As I was preparing for today and I looked at the program that was put together, it struck me that everybody besides Joe, on behalf of our governor, everybody has had ties to Judge Barnes through South Bend and St. Joe County. Heppenheimer walked by me and said, before he spoke today, I only have 7 pages. Well, Mitch, I only have 3. Well, that's a good segue. Because I am the mayor, Judge, I don't have a single gift to give you.
What's new?
That is, unless you want a pothole. And to be hanging again with, you see, I've had like 7 lives. And I've been in this courtroom for most everybody who was introduced today when they assumed the bench, when we were swearing them in the 80s and the 90s and the early part of the 21st century. And now we're in the process of saying goodbye. And it's special for me to be here, both at the Alpha and the Omega. So to be with people like Mitch and Judge Crone and Judge Brook, obviously here on behalf of my dear friend Michael Barnes, I kind of feel like I'm at a Dingus Day celebration. And I used to do a lot of those Dingus Day celebrations. But no more, because nobody in South Bend can vote for me. I, as mayor, do have the honor and the privilege, I hope you don't find it presumptuous, to speak on behalf of at least the residents, the people of the city of Indianapolis. And it is that voice I carry when I first say to my dear friend, Judge Michael Barnes, thank you. Thank you for your leadership, your outstanding service, a lifetime of commitment. Above all, I admit that I admire and appreciate Judge Barnes' dedication to justice, to fairness, to equity. You have been a devoted public servant, an unparalleled advocate for 45 years. That's quite a legacy. And through Judge Barnes' 20 years, as has been mentioned, as the St. Joseph County prosecutor, he fought zealously and tirelessly for the most vulnerable of our neighbors. And you were rightfully rewarded for that commitment. As Judge Barnes was elected and re-elected 5 times. For what it's worth, Judge Barnes was elected and re-elected prosecutor more times than I have ever been elected to anything. And I've run a lot. It is true, your life as prosecutor undoubtedly touched countless individuals, from spearheading the foundation of the Child Abuse Services Investigation and Education Center in South Bend, to collecting over $100 million in delinquent child support payments for the children of St. Joseph County. The fingerprints of your 2-decade-long tenure in that office, I dare say, will never fade. And as judge on the Indiana Court of Appeals, Judge Barnes has left his mark on history, authoring over 2,800 legal opinions during a distinguished 18-year career on the bench. 2,800 opinions, no small feat. And it is fair to say that Judge Barnes's writing style is unique. Known for not using 4 words when 2 will do, something I've never learned. And known for using humor when appropriate. From First Amendment violations to understanding criminal procedure, his insight of law will be sorely missed on this great court. Your career as a prosecutor and a judge has been a testament. It's been a testament to the truth that one person who chooses a life of public service can do great things. The proof is in all of us gathered here this afternoon, and all the lives throughout the state of Indiana that have been made better by Michael Barnes' guiding hand. Your legacy shall endure beyond your tenure. As prosecutor and as judge, you have provided countless young lawyers and law students with opportunities to cut their teeth. You've advocated on behalf of developmentally disabled individuals, and in so doing have received the Joseph J. Newman Award for committed and outstanding advocacy on behalf of developmentally disabled individuals. As a result, you have served on boards helping the American Cancer Society, as well as the Alcoholism Council of St. Joseph County, all of which inspirational, to say the least. It is truly impossible to measure what Michael Barnes has done in the pursuit of justice all these years. And I know I speak for all of us gathered here today, Judge, everyone in this courtroom, that today is a bittersweet moment. Bittersweet in the sense of losing a great, staunch advocate and jurist, but at the same time, we are all happy that you and Alberta and kids and grandkids will have some time to kick back, enjoy some time with each other, and as has been mentioned, maybe even spend a few days at the Cleveland Indians games. So, I'll end by simply saying that in 1990, I ran for the office of Secretary of State in Indiana, and it was one of those few times that I won. And I got a note from then Prosecutor Barnes shortly thereafter, said, "Never thought I'd see that happen." I suppose I didn't either. And then not too many years ago, the President of the United States was moved to nominate me to serve as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana, a position I held for 4 years and was honored to serve. But shortly after Senate confirmation, I received yet another note from Judge Barnes saying I really didn't see that.
Well, he said he valued honesty.
And in 2015, when I was fortunate enough to be elected mayor of this great city, I didn't hear from Judge Barnes at all. So from one former prosecutor to another former prosecutor, thank you, Judge Barnes, for your decades of service, and may God forever bless you and your family.
Well, at least someone appreciates Judge Barnes's honesty. Sanford Brook, Sandy Brook, has known Judge Barnes forever. They were prosecutors together. He was the chairperson of Barnes for Congress campaign committee and was on the Court of Appeals, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, and has been a lifelong friend of Judge Barnes. So, Judge Brook.
Chief Justice Rush, Judge Vedic, Judge Barnes, members of the Indiana Supreme Court, and to my former colleagues on the Court of Appeals, Alberta, Tim, John, Pat. Within a few years of moving to Colorado in 2004, I was at a charitable event with a colleague when he introduced me to the then governor of Colorado, Bill Ritter. Governor Ritter asked the polite question what I had done in Indiana, and I said I served as a judge. And he asked where I sat, and I gave a refrain that I have given a few times and said, well, I sat on the trial bench in St. Joseph County, and before I could finish, the governor interrupted and said, South Bend, St. Joe County, Mike Barnes territory. And as life often goes, the rest of the conversation with the governor was about Mike. Was about Mike and Governor Ritter serving on the National District Attorneys Association board together. Was about Mike as being, in Governor Ritter's words, a leader among leaders. Clearly, Mike's impact knows no boundaries. I was in this courtroom last for my own retirement ceremony from the Court of Appeals, and it is an honor for me to celebrate this with Mike and my former colleagues. Mike, my dear friend for so many years. We've come to celebrate your accomplishments and accolades. 44 years of a strong personal and professional friendship with Mike would, of course, afford me the opportunity to touch upon numerous facets of Mike's career. Most are flattering, many entertaining, and a distinct subset which shall remain unspoken in this particular audience. But with Governor Ritter's recognition as an example, I want to focus on the 20-plus years Mike served as St. Joseph County prosecuting attorney. Many of you know that Mike worked tirelessly toward change in St. Joseph County's criminal justice system. What you may not realize is the breadth of Mike's influence, both regionally and nationally. Now, there are two primary aspects of Mike's prosecutorial career I wish to celebrate. First, Mike's incredible skill as a lawyer, and in the spirit of completeness, I will touch upon some cases he remembers and a couple I'm sure he wants to forget. Second, I will discuss the tremendous impact Mike has had both regionally and nationally. He was the first full-time prosecutor in St. Joseph County, and for his 20-plus years as prosecutor, I was fortunate to have a front seat. For 12 of those 20 years, my seat was on the trial bench. My seat may have been a bit higher than Mike's, but the level of the seat certainly was no indication of the intelligence, personality, or force that dominated the courtroom, as Mike's presence and command of the room had no equal. He is truly a gifted trial lawyer. Those lawyers who opposed him at the defense table often talked about their greatest and most insurmountable problem when they opposed Mike. Jurors just fell in love with him. He not only possessed the persuasive advocacy skills of the best trial lawyers, but the courtroom there was no one like Mike. His ability to quickly change direction during a case while simultaneously enduring himself with jurors was never more apparent than in a case in which, after finishing voir dire, he quietly looked at the jurors, thanked them for their service, and proceeded to counsel table, where he sat down, leaned back on his chair, and went ass over apple cart with a perfect backflip, ending rolling on the courtroom floor. The judge politely asked, "You okay, Mr. Barnes?" And Mike quickly responded, "Pretty agile for a big man." The jurors laughed, the judge smiled, and I'm quite sure the defense attorney, ascribed some purposeful motive to Mike's fall. In the courtroom, he could take whatever the judge threw at him, literally, and he handled it professionally. While trying a felony murder case in front of a testy St. Joseph's Superior Court judge, the judge got so angry at Mike that he threw his legal pad at him and stormed off the bench. Luckily for Mike, Alberta was watching from the back of the courtroom. Unbelievably, while the courtroom was still stunned by the judge's outburst, and while Mike, having successfully dodged the legal pad, remember, pretty agile for a big man, while Mike sat there silent, the judge entered the back of the courtroom, sat next to Alberta, who at the time was pregnant, put his arm around her and simply said, "Hey, how you doing?" Even angry judges loved Mike, and in those few moments when they couldn't, they, like all of us, loved Alberta. Another case I was going to touch upon, Mitch covered, and since I was not an et al., I will skip most of this, only to say that that case, Barnes and the Kit Kat Lounge, is a favorite staple of First Amendment law taught in law schools throughout the country. It lives on in the world of drama as the story was turned into an off-Broadway play in 2013. The play opened in Washington, D.C., with Mike in the audience. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was also there. From backward flips in the courtroom to the U.S. Supreme Court, Mike's impact knows no boundaries. His strength of character and profound commitment to public service greatly influenced all of us who were so proud to be a member of his prosecutor's staff. Mike, the audience today, is a testament to those who served with you, because as we look out, so many of us who served in Mike's prosecutor's family are here to celebrate today. Now, it was always apparent Mike possessed a unique ability to merge firmness with respect and decisiveness with humility. He was always able to determine the appropriate cause of action by drawing on his capacity for fairness, compassion, and prominently, his empathy for victims. Apart from his skills as a trial lawyer, he committed endless hours to making the lives of those less fortunate better, all in the name of criminal and civil justice. Just to name a few, he pioneered development of the Casey Center, a one-stop advocacy center for children victimized by crimes of sexual and physical abuse and neglect. The Casey Center has become a model that has been replicated throughout the nation. Mike's founding message even rings louder today when he said, "It's not about the prosecution, it's about protecting the children." He established the first victim witness program in the state, which later became a part of another one of Mike's innovations, the Special Victims Unit, made up of investigators from various law enforcement agencies. It is an investigative branch of the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office committed to serving families in St. Joseph County who have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, or physical and sexual abuse. His tireless efforts garnered recognition and accolades from all corners of the criminal justice system, both locally and nationally. Because of Mike's humility, I am guessing that even those of you who have worked close with him have not been told about some of these things. Twice during his tenure as prosecutor, he was cited by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for his success with child support enforcement and collections. He received the Indiana Family and Social Service Administration State Director Award for the outstanding child support program in the state. The Indiana Victim Assistance Network presented him a Special Advocates Award. And Logan Center, one of Indiana's most prominent care facilities for those with mental and physical challenges, recognized Mike for committed and outstanding advocacy on behalf of developmentally disabled individuals. As President-elect, and Chair Emeritus of the National District Attorneys Association Board of Directors, Mike was one of our nation's leading voice in facing the challenges of our country's prosecuting attorneys. The incredible people who worked with Mike were at the time simply a band of dedicated individuals filled with creative determination, all trying to make a difference. Mike's colleagues, well, let me name a few of those people that Mike served with. One of them, his colleague on a different bench, was Judge Merrick Garland, who, by the way, has just rekindled his relationship with Mike. Senator Claire McCaskill, then a Missouri prosecutor. The Miami prosecutor and former U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno. Former FBI directors Louis Freeh and James Comey, then Justice Department lawyers. Former U.S. Attorney Generals Ed Meese, Dick Thornburgh, and Eric Holder. Now, let me digress a bit because Eric Holder was almost a reason that we wouldn't have been here today. Because when he was chief of the criminal division of the Justice Department, he summoned Mike to Washington to talk with him about a job in the Justice Department. Fortunately for all of us, Mike continued his efforts as St. Joseph County prosecuting attorney. On 3 occasions, Mike sat in the Oval Office as part of a team who briefed the president on criminal justice issues. And finally, his service on the National Advisory Council for Crimes Against Women led him to making a contribution to the Violence Against Women's Act, sponsored by then Senator Joe Biden. The accolades and accomplishments speak for themselves, and there are many. But I suspect what speaks most profoundly to all of us, and why we are here, is the pure, unconditional friendship that Mike has offered each of us, and his unyielding commitment to serve as a voice of those who are often not heard. When you are able to move seamlessly from protecting the most vulnerable among us to Washington, D.C. circles with our nation's leaders, to the U.S. Supreme Court and the Indiana Court of Appeals, all while maintaining your sense of humility and genuineness, you are undeniably a force that knows no boundaries. Mike, you are indeed pretty agile for a big man, but more importantly, you are a treasure for which Indiana and this court will forever be grateful.
Thank you, Sandy. Next, we have the Honorable Terry Crone, the judge from our court, the Court of Appeals. Before that, he was a judge on, yes, the Superior Court, or the Circuit Court. Excuse me, Judge Crone. Oh, my goodness. Circuit Court of St. Joe County. Judge Crone.
Thank you, Judge Vedic, Chief Judge Rush, justices, judges, justice lovers all. I appreciate very much the opportunity to say a few words about my good friend Mike Barnes. It was only 3 years ago that I was afforded the honor of saying a few words about Judge Friedlander upon his retirement. And normally I'm not invited back to speak this quickly. So I very much appreciate it. Judge Vedic passed me this and asked me to read this before I started my comments. Says, the views about to be expressed are strictly those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official, unofficial, or semi-official views of the Court of Appeals, any member thereof, the Supreme Court, or any other judicial officer of either general, limited, or special jurisdiction. Any resemblance to people real or imagined is purely coincidental, and any reproduction without the express written consent of Major League Baseball is strictly prohibited. Okay. I met Mike Barnes in the spring of 1975. I was finishing my first year of law school, and I needed a job. Mike was a deputy prosecutor in the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office, and he was in charge of interviewing and hiring interns. He interviewed me and promptly hired some random dude from Illinois. Now, I'm sure you can't imagine a person holding a grudge for 43 years and waiting for a retirement ceremony to exact revenge. But I digress. Mike was appointed to the Court of Appeals in May of 2000. As you have heard, he brought to the job a wealth of experience and knowledge in the criminal law area. He also worked briefly for Barnes & Thornburg. He must have done a hell of a job for them because 18 years later, the firm is still named after him.
I wish.
Touche.
Nobody else did that? When judges retire, they're often referred to as great legal scholars or having common sense. The two are not mutually exclusive, and Mike has both. He applied the same intellectual curiosity and hard work to areas of the law where he didn't have an extensive background as he did to being a prosecutor. To many, he's rightfully recognized as an expert in the area of criminal law. But to his colleagues, he's also recognized as a thoughtful, well-prepared voice of reason and scholarship. Before I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, I had negotiated criminal cases with Mike while I was a lawyer. He tried some cases in my court while I was a trial judge, and even testified in my court once. Since I've had the pleasure of working with him on the Court of Appeals, we have obviously spent a great deal more time together. I often call Mike as a sounding board and start off our conversation by asking, am I crazy or is there a problem with this legal argument? He gently reminds me that both propositions may well be true, and then shares his valuable insight. We don't always agree, but hey, no one's perfect. We've shared many memorable meals and conversations over the years. I consider him a valued friend and confidant. Few people know how close Mike came to being appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. About 5 years ago, we were eating dinner at Parisi's restaurant across from Notre Dame when Digger Phelps strolled out of the kitchen. Don't ask, you'd have to know Digger to know what he's doing in the kitchen. But anyway, Digger joined us and proceeded to announce that he was running for President of the United States. It's a true story. And when, not if, because Digger's a very positive guy, he was elected, he was appointing Mike to the Supreme Court. Laugh if you want, but believe me, stranger things have happened. And you could have gotten better odds on Digger back then than this close. Another memorable meal we had was with then Senator, now Judge John Broden, where we convinced him to introduce a bill tying annual judicial pay raises to raises in the executive branch. That bill, with the help of many others, became law and is a significant factor in not only making sure judges' salaries keep up with inflation, but more importantly, in maintaining the independence of the judiciary in Indiana. As you've heard, Mike is very loyal. He loves to tell his colleagues about the reunions of his undefeated high school football team and brags often about his wonderful family. Mike is even loyal to those who are not always loyal to him. Look around and talk to all the people from South Bend who knew and worked with him years ago, or the members of that high school football team, some of whom have traveled here today to honor him. I've witnessed him display the highest levels of integrity and respect for the law. Now, back to that internship thing. When someone new is appointed to our court, they ask me what the judges are really like. I tell them we're all quirky in our own way, and Mike certainly has his quirks. First of all, as Glenn mentioned, his office is always extremely dark, as in not well lit. It's like entering a bat cave or Dracula's lair. I don't want to say Mike is the least tech-savvy person employed by the Court of Appeals, but if I did, it would be true. Whenever there's a proposal to update or get some new equipment, Mike's standard response is, do we really need that stuff? Stuff being his word for all things tech. He has that old man habit of turning off a cell phone when not making a call, and occasionally you have to call his landline to tell him to turn his cell phone on so you can see a text or an email. I'm not making this up. If I had $1 for every time Mike Barnes butt dialed me, this would be my retirement ceremony. You haven't lived until you get a butt dial from Mike and initially think he's in some type of physical distress, only to eventually realize he's driving back and forth to South Bend while singing Uptown Funk.
Got my checks on with my single around.
Don't ask me why, but he has memorized all the words. Mike's staff reports he's often overheard loudly singing along to the radio while sitting alone in his office. They can hear him through the walls, and they describe his singing style as similar to a guy playing the piano. He hits a lot of different keys in one song. During his 18 years as a judge on the Court of Appeals, Judge Barnes has driven back and forth to South Bend most every week. That's approximately 900 round trips, or about 270,000 miles. He's authored over 2,800 majority opinions. A few of the more prominent include upholding a $55 million personal injury judgment, which at the time was the largest ever awarded by an Indiana state court. Holding exculpatory clauses designed to immunize landlords from liability to tenants for landlords' negligence were void as against public policy. holding that prosecutors can't exclude defendants from diversion programs based upon their inability to pay fees, and invalidating local court rules that allow the use of contempt and thus imprisonment to collect debt. Even more impressive from my perspective is the number of times our Supreme Court has adopted Judge Barnes' dissent or concurrence as their position. These include, among others, the definition of a deadly weapon, the proper instruction for defining accomplice liability, adoption of the substantial trustworthiness evidentiary standard in probation proceedings, the appropriate standard to be used regarding double habitual offender enhancements, the proper approach for release of grand jury transcripts, confirming the crime of escape has been committed even if a writ is later found to be defective, and that the expungement law did not apply to civil forfeiture records. Mike's been a part of this court for many years and will be sorely missed. Many questions abound about what life will be like without him. Who will take his place? What will they be like? More importantly, who will go to lunch with me? It's not easy duty. But the biggest concern was expressed by Mike's lovely wife, Alberta, who on more than one occasion has been overheard to inquire, what the heck is he going to do with all that junk in his office? He sure as hell isn't bringing it home to our house. Mike's office, if you turn the lights on, is filled with plaques, proclamations, photos, and memorabilia from a long and illustrious career of public service. Where it's all going is a concern often expressed also by Mike. I've given this a great deal of thought, and I think I've come up with a solution. Today happens to be the 4th anniversary of my father's passing, and my father loved Mike Barnes. There were times when I thought that my father liked Mike Barnes more than he liked me. And I know for a fact. And I know for a fact he liked Alberta a hell of a lot. So I was going through some of his stuff the other day, and I found this, and obviously Mike needs another office. So if I might suggest, and no offense, Mr. Cotter, I found this, which is older than some of the folks in the room, and that if this works out for you, I'm going to be getting back with you on the on that intern thing.
Okay.
In a couple of years.
Very well. Thank you so much.
Love you, brother.
Thank you.
I know by now you may be feeling like you're at a federal court retirement, but I do have to say my piece as well. We're all interested in successful people, and particularly how they became successful. So I want to go through a couple of Judge Barnes's accomplishments, and it's a little binary view here, and I wanted to look at it whether it was his luster that made him successful or his luck. And by luster, I don't mean floor polish. What I mean is the luster of a star, your brilliance from within. So I want to go through 4 things. The first is your appointment to the Court of Appeals. Was it luster? Well, we've heard everyone here, Mayor Hogsett, Sandy Brook, talk about all of his accomplishments, and indeed you were America's prosecutor for a long time. And you were a graduate of St. Ambrose and a graduate of University of Notre Dame Law School. So there's a little bit of luster there. But on the other hand, in order to get on the Court of Appeals, the stars have to align. And so there has to be some kind of luck. There has to be an opening. You have to be the right age at the right time, and you have to have the right accomplishments, and it doesn't hurt to know a governor. But for you, I will say this one, I'm going to put Mike for luster. Second, Barnes versus Glenn Theater. We've all heard about Barnes versus Glenn Theater, the luster in it. Well, he prosecuted it. And he probably at the time knew that it was a big First Amendment issue. He may have even known at that time that the United States Supreme Court might have taken it up. And we'll give you the benefit of doubt. You might have known 25 years later that that Broadway show would come up and that you would be called after it was done, after the attorney for the new dancers stripped. You were called up there and asked your opinion about the case and the play. You may have known that. But in terms of luck, you all may not know, he was the third named party of this case. First was Lindley Pearson, who was no longer the Attorney General when it came up to the United States Supreme Court. And second, the city of South Bend, who simply dropped out. So I'm going to give that to the luck side of you. The fact that your opinions have been widely read by attorneys and lay people. On the luster side, you know, you are full of that good Irish blarney. There's no question about it. You told me you've never kissed a blarney stone, and now I know why, because you might not be that agile for a big man. But blarney is 100% in your Irish genes. Let's think about some of the opinions that he wrote. On the scope of a search warrant, he said, police can't find an elephant in an ice cube tray. On a bride's dispute over a wedding, he dissented, and he wrote to his colleagues, I'm disappointed that you can't stand by me. And he said the majority saved the last dance for the bride. When a defendant requested an attorney, he went to Horton the elephant and said, well, he meant what he said and he said what he meant. And my one that just galls me every time, we had a case together and no one wanted to rule the way we had to rule. It was just basically unfair, but it was a law. And so I wrote this long opinion setting forth why we had to rule this way, and I used all the right language. I was constrained to do this, we're constrained. He wrote 2 sentences concurring the result opinion. The citizens of the state were hornswoggled here. I regret we can do nothing about it. Afterwards, people talked to me about this case over and over again, and I'm thinking pretty well about myself, and then I realized they were talking about Barnes' 2-sentence concurring in result.
Touchy, touchy.
Touchy, touchy. So on this, I'm going to say there's no luck. This is all your luster. Finally, his celebrity status 2 years ago. He was on the TV, I don't know if you all saw it, over and over and over. Justice Antonin Scalia had died, and people were looking for pictures, and all the networks had all these pictures and videotapes of Justice Scalia. Well, one of them, which played over and over again on national TV, was Barnes, a young Barnes, walking 10 feet to Scalia, and we saw the whole promenade, and then he shook Justice Scalia's hand. Well, you clean up well in terms of luster. Your handmade suits are eye-catching, as are your French cuffs with Barnes. No doubt about it, Barnes embroidered on it. He also wears neon green, pink, and yellow socks. So that could be eye-catching and catch the attention of the executive producer, but I think it was just luck that you were on there. So as you know, Mike, it's our tradition to give a rocking chair for the retiring judge of the Court of Appeals. Because you didn't want one, and out of courtesy to you, Alberta, we are not giving a rocking chair to you. We know, Alberta, that it's an adjustment already to have to live 24/7 with Mike. And on top of that, let me reiterate what Judge Crone said on top of it with all his stuff. Plaques, photos, memorabilia of the Indians, the Cleveland Indians, the Fighting Irish, JFK. How about his silly t-shirts? Does anybody know about his silly t-shirts? How's this one? I used to do the hokey pokey, but I turned myself around. And last but not least, all right, your 55-year-old hat from Boy State. And I say that only so you all realize the extent of this collection that he has. And also to tell you that when we go to Boy State for oral argument, after it's done, Barnes pulls out his hat in solidarity with the guys from Boy State and says, you know, here I was one of you too. So instead of a bulky rocking chair, we're going to give you a small gift. Not yet, not yet. It's a Waterford crystal shamrock.
Oh, great.
To symbolize your luster and luck. And also we're going to give you 2 small contributions in your name to ARC and the Casey Center.
Thank you.
This, not yet. There is no doubt his luster and his luck has saved him and brought him to this position, but more importantly, his loyalty to his family, his loyalty to his friends, his loyalty to the court, to the law, to public service has put you where you are. I hope you look in this room, and even though it's been a very long ceremony, look at the faces of these people, and you'll see the loyalty coming right back at you. When we started on the court 18 years ago, I said that the citizens of the state of Indiana were lucky to have you on the Court of Appeals. And I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. And you have been loyal 100%. Godspeed, my friend. We've already been through a box of tissues up here, so let's give it over to you, Judge Barnes.
Thank you very much. It's a great gig when you have the Chief Justice of the state of Indiana go get you a box of tissues. Thank you very much, Madam Chief Justice. I am without words as I look out today and see all of you who've come to share this moment with us. I'm deeply grateful and certainly know that without all of you, I wouldn't be sitting here. First, of course, I have to thank my family. My wife, Alberta, who's been my best friend and biggest fan for all these years. She worked both as an outstanding educator and a wonderful mother in order that I could follow my dreams, and I'm forever grateful. Our sons Tim and John and their beautiful families deserve a special mention. Being the sons of the prosecuting attorney and appellate court judge is not a simple task in a place where everyone, including teachers, parents, and yes, the police, know who you are and watch for the slightest misstep. They're extremely fortunate that their beautiful and talented wives, Bess and Dawn, and of course, the smartest, best grandchildren in the world are in their lives, and we're very proud of them. Brother Pat, his wife Terry, Pat, whose loyalty, love, and support has pulled me through many difficult times, I thank you. One is said to be a product of his environment, and I am sure that is true of me. Whatever impact I may have had as a judge on the Indiana Court of Appeals has necessarily come as a result of where I've been, what I've experienced in life. Certainly the laws and its precedents have necessarily guided me, but I think we all would agree that we see the law through the prism of our life experience, and that's certainly true in my case. Experienced trial lawyers claim that in order to effectively communicate, one needs to tell a story or paint a picture. Well, If that's the case, my story, as most of you know, began in an 800-person farming community. Work ethic and discipline were expected in the parochial grade school and township high school that I attended. My world was schoolwork and sports. From each of those, I took pride in sticking with a task and interacting with others in team sports. And just as several have mentioned, the highlight of a very dubious athletic career was the 1964 football championship. 9-0, one touchdown scored on us. One touchdown scored on us. We worked hard, had discipline, backed each other up, and had great success. We were loyal to one another, and lifelong bonds were formed. 3 of those Panthers are here today. Our star halfback, our star linebacker and all-state position player, and of course, our star quarterback. Stand up. St. Ambrose College was the next step, and there I first interacted with big city people, people of color, people of different ethnicities, true academics. My sense of ethics and fairness were sharpened there. My appreciation of other ways of life and ethnicities and lifestyles was honed, and those experiences indelibly shaped my life, my perspective, and my understanding that not all persons were cookie-cutter made. Notre Dame Law School, of course, provided me with the academic and legal excellence, forced me to think in a way I had not done previously. It served as the primary building block for my judicial career. On the first day of law school, the first person that I met at my locker was George Lynch. We have remained lifelong friends, and he's here. Kleenex break. My tenure as the St. Joseph County prosecutor was the ultimate life-shaping experience. Surrounded by smart, dedicated, and professional people, that wonderful opportunity allowed me to peer into the soul of a community. Unspeakable evil at times, unimaginable tragedy, but those were liberally sprinkled with the highest of emotional highs when we help people find themselves, write their lives, and become productive and contributing members of our society. I know we left the community a better place, helped thousands of people, and genuinely tried to do the right thing in every circumstance. The staff, the lawyers, the paralegals, the clerical staff who worked with me shared a vision of a tough but compassionate prosecutor's office. They are my colleagues and friends, and many are here today. Stand up. That experience clearly formed my legal view and conscience as a judge, and it was the best of times and sometimes the worst of times. Always, though, people were involved, people with lives and families and hopes and dreams, and it was and is important as a judge to remember that, and I hope I have. During the same time, I was fortunate to be colleagues with an outstanding group of Indiana prosecutors. I learned from them, admired their skill, devotion to public service, and took many valuable lessons from them into my judicial career. They helped me, and I'm forever grateful. Nation, Whiteleather, Sigler, Wiest, Hill, Dowd, Crawford, Radovich, stand up. When the opportunity came to come to the Court of Appeals, I eagerly welcomed it. I'll be forever indebted to Governors O'Bannon and Kernan for giving me this chance. I think that's a little of the luck and luster stuff, Judge Vedic. The Lieutenant Governor happened to be Joe Kernan. As I did in every situation I encountered in my career, I immediately surrounded myself with people who were whip smart, highly motivated, and dedicated to the law. Specifically, the lawyers who served as our clerks were and are my collaborators, legal experts, and in some instances, shapers of opinion. They are the heart and soul of my judgeship, and they made me look judicial, sagacious, and wise. No small task, believe me. They have served the citizens of our state with the highest degree of distinction, and I am profoundly grateful for what they've done for me. Stand up. I believe deeply and resolutely in the rule of law. I believe deeply in the legal system. I'm not blind to the faults and foibles of our system. I do believe that men and women of dedication acting as judges are enforcing the rule of law every day. Our society depends on that. No amount of extraneous, what I call noise, from those who seek their own gains by undermining our system should ever deter men and women of dedication and courage to discharge their duties unencumbered by outside interference. Law is the guidepost of a civilized society. It permeates every aspect of our life, and it gives every person in our communities a sense of certainty and order. We depend on the law to fairly and equitably adjudicate the problems and conflicts and questions a pluralistic society such as ours poses. If I have done anything as a judge, I hope that I have fairly and without hesitation given a hearing to and a voice for those who deserve it. I've always had a good heart and an open mind for all whose cases we decide. My life will be changing now. I'm eager to accept and embrace whatever lies ahead. I labor under no delusion that there's some vast legacy that I'll leave. That won't be the case. But I am sure that the men and women who work with me, the now judges, magistrates, prosecutors, attorneys in private practice, FBI agents, paralegals, and all who have gone on to other vocations, will take with them at least a sliver of what we accomplished and learned together, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. If they do that, and I am sure they will, that will be the best and most cherished legacy one could ever hope for. Robert Kennedy eloquently and succinctly summarized what I believe is our primary mission both as judges and citizens. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustices, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. My hope is that all of you, whatever your role in life, have the joy, the sense of accomplishment, and the peace of mind that I have enjoyed. It's been a privilege to be a judge. I am grateful and blessed. Thank you.
So please join us afterwards for the reception that we have right out in the atrium so we can celebrate or not this occasion. Hi, Addie. So with that, we're in recess.